This is Henry Walter Bates, a British naturalist and explorer who lived in the 19th century. He became famous for his expeditions to the Amazon rainforest in the 1840s and 50s, during which he collected over 1,400 species of insects and other animals, many of them new to science. Among those were almost 100 species of butterflies from the families Athominae and Heliconiae. While sorting the butterflies into groups based on appearance, he noticed something very unusual. Something that would lead him to propose a completely new biological theory. Some species looked so similar that he couldn't tell them apart just by looking at their wings, but closer examination of less obvious features showed they weren't even closely related. Bates proposed that this resemblance between unrelated species was actually an anti-predator adaptation. This observation led him to the theory of mimicry, species evolving to closely resemble a distasteful species, copying its warning colors without actually sharing its toxicity. Since then, we've come a long way and we now know of many different kinds of mimicry and how they work, and honestly, some of them are mind-blowing. We'll start with a defensive type of mimicry and look at some of the most stunning examples out there, and then we'll move into aggressive mimicry, where predators use mimicry to hunt. And I promise you, some of these are so clever that they seem absolutely fake. So let's start right where mimicry itself got its name. The first type of mimicry is named after Henry Walter Bates himself, and it's called Batesian mimicry. Fundamentally, it is exactly how Bates described it. Batesian mimicry is when a harmless species evolves the warning signals of a harmful species to avoid getting eaten or attacked by predators. But what does that actually look like in nature? This next species might be one of the best examples to illustrate Batesian mimicry. There's some caterpillars that mimic snakes both in appearance and behavior. Take Hemeroplanus triptolemus for example. This is a moth species that lives in Central America, and the moth itself doesn't look that impressive. But if we take a look at their earlier life stage, things get pretty freaky. In their caterpillar stage, they are impressively good at mimicking a snake. Just look at this. The thing is though, they don't always look like that. It's just when they're threatened that they suddenly start cosplaying snakes with insane accuracy. If they sense any danger, maybe a bird or a lizard in the area, they begin their whole snake rigmarole. Dangling from a twig, they reveal their underside, which is patterned in false snakeskin, and eye spots that appear to glisten. By sucking in air through tiny holes in their surface, the caterpillars inflate their head to create the illusion of a triangular skull swollen with venom glands. And despite their comical lack of any actual weaponry, this tactic seems to be highly effective. Scientists from the Carleton University in Canada used artificial caterpillars made out of pastry dough to test if these eye spots actually have any protective effect. They found that eye spots and a snake-shaped head can greatly improve a caterpillar's odds of survival among avian predators, even in regions where tree-dwelling snakes are rare. And the crazy part is there's many caterpillars who do this type of snake mimicry, and some of them even mimic snakes that are not even from the same continent or from the same place that they live in. And how does that help them? Well, the predators that eat them are migratory birds, which also see the snake species that the caterpillar is unknowingly replicating. Which makes the mimicry effective because the bird is scared of the caterpillar, even though the caterpillar has never seen the snake. But this is actually a reoccurring theme in mimicry, and we'll get to that in a second. Now, if you think faking a snake head is impressive, wait until you see what this next species has come up with to protect their offspring. Like, this genuinely blew my mind. This is the Cinereus mourner, who's endemic to the forests of South America. And they have evolved a genius form of mimicry. When they hatch, they look very different from the adults. They have bright orange feathering, which makes them look a lot like caterpillars of the flannel moth. I know these might look cute, but touching them is incredibly painful, because what might look like hair are actually venomous spines that upon contact can cause paralysis and extreme pain. Some victims describe the pain similar to breaking a bone. Now, any predator that has made the unfortunate contact with this flannel moth caterpillar will likely avoid anything that even closely resembles them, including the helpless chicks of the Cinereus mourner. And here's where it gets even crazier. The chicks also mimic the behavior of the caterpillar. Whenever the mother is out of the nest, they crouch down and move only side to side, perfectly mimicking the caterpillar. And I think this is a good point to say that the chicks of course have no idea what they're doing. They don't know that they're mimicking a caterpillar, and they don't even know that this caterpillar exists. This behavior is just an innate instinct that has been refined over thousands of generations, since the chicks that most resembled this caterpillar had a better chance of survival. And that's all there is to it, just plain old natural selection. But of course, seeing it now is super impressive. And please keep in mind that this applies to almost all of the examples that we talk about in this video. There are some exceptions, but mostly these animals don't actually know that they're mimicking another animal. This caterpillar doesn't know it's mimicking a snake, yeah, you get the point. There's also Batesian mimicry without the looks and just the behavior. Take burrowing owls for example. Burrowing owls live in burrows underground, so they're constantly facing danger of getting hunted by predators like coyotes or cats. Their only real protection is that they evolve distinct warning calls that sound a lot like rattling snakes. Because many animals are inherently afraid of snakes, this protection works pretty well. Another animal that might have even fooled you already are hoverflies. These completely harmless flies have evolved to mimic or resemble bees and wasps. But like I said, they're completely harmless and don't even sting. Still though, this gives them a survival advantage because predators tend to avoid wasps and they kind of look like wasps, so it just works. And the funny thing is, the wasp costume seems to be a pretty famous one in the natural world since there's many examples of it. We can see this type of mimicry in a few beetles, in some mantis flies, and even in this jumping spider. And there are also some really impressive moth species with this camouflage. So as you can see, many times it's not just two species that are involved in mimicry, and there's also some situations where it gets pretty complicated. And this brings us to a very confusing mimicry sort of circle situation. This is a coral snake, and they look hella dangerous, which they are. They have a very potent neurotoxin, so if they bite you, it's not looking too good. And this fella right here also looks super dangerous, and they are not. At all. This is a milk snake, and they don't even have any poison, but they sure look like they do. And this is a false coral snake, which is mildly poisonous, so somewhere in between the two other snakes. And this whole thing is super confusing because all three of these species, and some others, are mimics of each other. Sort of. From the milk snake's perspective, it's just Batesian mimicry because they themselves are harmless, they use the other toxic snakes as powerful defensive mimicry. For the coral snake, however, things are a lot more difficult. You see, coral snakes are so deadly that usually when predators interact with them, they just die. And this is a problem because the whole point of their bright coloration is for the predator to learn that these colors are dangerous. But if they die every time, they don't have the chance to learn. So for the coral snake, it's beneficial to look like the less poisonous false coral snake. This is because when a predator attacks the false coral snake, they survive but learn that they should stay away from animals that look like that. So now the more deadly coral snake and the less deadly milk snake both mimic the false coral snake. This is called Emslayen mimicry, where a deadly animal, in this case the coral snake, mimics a less deadly one, and this is the only example that we know of. And I think the reason for that is because usually we don't have this sort of grade of toxicity that we have in these three snake species, and it's actually more than three, but just to simplify things. And that's why this is not a very common form of mimicry, because this is a very unique case. Also, Emslayen mimicry is highly discussed, so let me know what you think about it in the comments, or if you have any other explanations for their coloration. There's a form of mimicry where the prey organism mimics the predator themselves. Because parasites and predators rarely attack their own. This is called Gilbertsian mimicry, and there's not that many examples of it. One of them is the plant genus Passiflora, which is eaten by the larvae of some heliconius butterflies. The host plants have evolved small yellow projections on their leaves, so-called stipules, that mimic mature heliconius eggs near the point of hatching. Female butterflies avoid laying their eggs near eggs already on a plant for two reasons. First, by choosing a plant without other heliconius eggs, they reduce the amount of intraspecific competition between the caterpillars. And second, the caterpillars are somewhat cannibalistic. So females that lay their eggs on empty plants give their offspring a better chance of actually making it to adulthood. These little stipules thus appear to be a form of Gilbertsian mimicry, where the plant mimics its own predator. You remember when I talked about the bees and wasps? Those two are an example of Müllerian mimicry, which is when two species that are both actually dangerous resemble each other because they both benefit from other animals avoiding them. Both of them have the aposematism with the bright yellow colors, and both of them can actually sting, so this works pretty well for both parties. These are the eyes of a pygmy owl. Wait, never mind. Pygmy owls have a set of fake eyes on their back, which is very misleading to predators that like to sneak up on their prey. And this is essentially a mimic mimicking itself. This is called Browerian mimicry. Another example are these butterflies. They have a fake head at the back of their wings, and they even have fake antennae that move very realistically. Scientists often find individuals of these butterflies with damage to the back of their wings, which means that this strategy is likely pretty effective. I'd much rather lose a part of my wing than my head, and I think the butterflies agree. Actually, there's one last sort of defensive mimicry, and I think it's one of the funniest ones, because it's not really helping the defense of the individual that's doing it, but it's still sort of defensive mimicry. You'll see what I mean in a second. This year's greatest actor of the natural world goes to this bird right here. Wait, did it just switch? Which wing was broken? Aristotelian mimicry is when an animal fakes an injury to lure a predator away from their nest. And this killdeer uses this form of mimicry as protection for their offspring. And since we can see them doing it, it's probably a pretty effective tactic, otherwise it wouldn't still be around. So far we have seen harmless mimics mimicking harmful models, we have seen mimics mimicking themselves, and we have seen deadly mimics mimicking less deadly models. But all of these were for defensive purposes, to avoid getting eaten. However, mimicry has also developed in some aggressive ways, where predators make use of it for their hunting. But before we get into that, there's one honorable mention that I just had to include in this video, and that is the mimic octopus, also known as the shape-shifting octopus. They can use several forms of mimicry depending on the specific situation they're in. Sometimes they use Batesian mimicry to resemble a toxic animal. Sometimes they use aggressive mimicry to look like a prey animal or camouflage themselves. And they're the only animal that we know of that actively mimics several types of animals depending on the situation. And they're just absolutely mind-blowing because their mimicry is just so detailed and well done. I'm thinking that's a great topic for a next video because I feel like there's probably a lot to learn about their biology. So if you'd be interested in a video about the mimic octopus or shape-shifting octopus, let me know down below in the comments. That's how these YouTubers do it, right? Aggressive mimicry is when a predator or a parasite uses mimicry to make their prey not be able to identify them. So basically a wolf in sheep's clothing. Many aggressive mimics use the promise of potential food as a lure. The alligator snapping turtle is a well-camouflaged ambush predator. It has a tongue that has a conspicuous pink extension that resembles a worm and can be sort of wiggled around. And that is enough to fool fish into thinking it's a real worm. Fish that try to eat this worm are themselves eaten by the turtle. Yikes. This next one is actually terrifying, not gonna lie. This is the spider-tailed horned viper. That looks so goddamn real. What the fuck? There's also this mussel mimicking a fish to lure in a larger predatory fish to just straight up shoot their larvae into the gills of that fish. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say to that one. Aggressive mimicry is also present in some spider species. Species such as Agriope argentada employ prominent patterns in the middle of their webs, such as little zigzags, and these may reflect ultraviolet light. which sort of mimics the pattern that pollinators see in many flowers. Spiders can also be the prey of aggressive mimicry. There's some assassin bugs, yes, that's actually what they are called, sick name, that purposefully plug the web of spiders to mimic being prey, and then they attack the spider when it approaches. Another classic example, of course, is the anglerfish, which uses a modified dorsal spine as a fishing rod with a bioluminescent lure to attract and capture prey. But you probably know all about the anglerfish because it's been talked about so many times already. This next animal uses a method that is very rare and only seen in a few species. The spotted predatory katydid mimics the calls of female cicadas to lure in male cicadas and then eat them. This type of sexual mimicry is when a mimic imitates a sexually receptive female, which provides a strong attraction effect on males. Another mimicry you probably already know is Gilbertsian or brood parasite mimicry. The classic example, of course, is the cuckoo, where the mother places the eggs in the nest of other birds, and then when the cuckoo chicks hatches, it pushes the other eggs out of the nest, and in many cases the mother of the original eggs then raises the cuckoo without even realizing that it's raising the chick of a totally different species. The last type of mimicry that we'll talk about are cases of mimicry that revolve around reproduction. For example, in Bakerian and Dodsonian mimicry, flowers imitate a flower that has nectar to lure in pollinators, but they don't actually provide any nectar. The mechanism occurs in several orchids, including this flower, which mimics flowers of another species, but they don't actually provide any nectar. I have to say, this last example that we'll talk about now, I think personally is very hilarious, and there's a lot of great nature documentaries or shots about it, because it's just very entertaining to watch. This is intersexual mimicry, which is when individuals of one sex in a species mimic members of the opposite sex from the same species, so that they can indulge in sneak mating. This sort of mimicry often happens in species where the alpha male has big harems of many females that he's guarding from other males, and then smaller males can try to go undercover as females to slip into the harem unnoticed and then mate with the females without the alpha noticing what's going on. I think cuttlefish are a very good example of this. Smaller male cuttlefish use sexual mimicry to bypass the dominant rivals by changing their skin patterns to look like females and hiding their long tentacles. This visual deception allows them to slip past the guarding males and mate undetected. And I don't know why, but I just think that's super hilarious. Since we still see this happening, this seems to be a pretty effective way of reproducing, which I don't know, I don't know. Just kind of funny. Yeah, that was basically all types of mimicry, more or less, with a few little examples that are not very well documented. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in biology related topics, feel free to follow along, and I'll see you in the next one.